Assalamu alaikum. Beautiful evening in Lahore. Today is 11th of February 2026. So, this debate on long run determinants of economic development and economic growth has really started with a very influential paper by World Bank economist David Dollar, who would write an excellent treatise on international trade titled Is Trade Good for the Poor? The paper was written in at the start of 21st century in year 2000. And what the paper would claim was that trade is indeed good for poverty alleviation, and thereby it is good for economic development and economic growth as well. The paper would highlight uh, the empirical findings once you map the data, including China, India, and East Asia. For China, India, and East Asia, indeed, sustainable economic growth rate happened, and there was significant poverty reduction. Millions of people, citizens, could join the middle class. But at the same time, that evidence was not universal. For a country like Pakistan, for a region like South Asia minus India, for Latin America, for Africa, trade liberalization, which happened as a policy suggestion by IFIs to liberalize their, the sector, the trading sector to international competition for those regions, developing regions. Not only sustainable economic growth did not happen, but poverty instead increased. And there was a lot of macroeconomic instability. So, therefore, there were two strands of evidence. Empirical evidence for China, India, and East Asia would suggest that liberalization, structural adjustment plans, and poverty reduction strategies were a successful policy suggestion, and poverty reduction did happen. Whereas for the rest of the developing world, the empirical evidence would suggest that macroeconomic instability would happen instead of poverty reduction when all the developing countries liberalize for international competition. Therefore, in 2004, as a response to David Dollar's paper, Dani Roderick's institutional rule paper came out. It was not about statistical insignificance, but trying to promote and propagate the moderate effect of international trade in determining long term economic development. Dani Roderick would eventually suggest that long term economic development would also depend on strong institutions, especially better rule of law. Whereas I would add to this evidence by not only increasing the institutional proxies, but including the role of human capital. Human capital, which suggests our proximity to postmodern world. Once you complete the equation with these three independent variables, which are institutions, globalization, and human capital, the statistical results would improve as a true good model would suggest. Not only that, institutions were more significant. Not only that, rule of law really mattered. Not only that, human capital was key for long term economic development by improving what Amartya Sen would say, increasing the capabilities of the citizens, but also globalization would matter. Globalization, which is proximity of the nation state to international competition and to participate in international markets through trading regimes, would matter. Therefore, that is something of a more comprehensive model. Here, I'm not saying that rule of law matter less than, for example, globalization, or human capital matter less than uh, globalization and rule of law. What I'm suggesting is the effects which could be captured through interactions of these terms, while at the same time utilizing state of the art instruments. For example, adding up an instrument for institutions to predict the role of rule of law, voice accountability, control for corruption, regulatory quality. I would use language shares, European and English language shares. And that would significantly improve the predictability of the model. So, as the work of 2025 Nobel laureates would suggest, that markets are central to the theme of economic and sustainable economic development. Growth, or having a economic growth, does not really depend on only macroeconomic stability, as many of the developing countries would make a policy, economic policy for, to stabilize their economies. It would also depend on the level of human capital. It will also depend the development of human agency and capabilities and rights, while at the same time it will also depend on institutional frameworks. While growth would really happen through markets.